They told us about the meteor 3 months ago. I actually found out through Reddit. Just woke up one morning to find articles at the top of every sub, gilded and stickied, as if a beloved celebrity had just died. Which was kinda accurate. After going to a few more sites and turning on the news, I confirmed it wasn't a joke. There was a meteor heading towards the Earth, and no one would be able to stop it. We were all going to die. But hey, don't panic, they said on the news. They didn't offer any reason not to panic, of course, so it made the command a little difficult to follow. To help ease the panic, they locked down cities and towns. Massive amounts of people coming and going would just cause chaos, so no one would be allowed to leave for a few weeks. I assumed they meant cities like LA or New York. But sure enough, military blockades popped up on every possible exit of my little Colorado town. Seemed like overkill. The phone lines were immediately busy, and no one seemed to be able to get through. I managed to get a single email to my mother before the internet went down, with water and plumbing not far behind. They started out rationing out food and water, but it was never enough. Everyone was scared, hot, hungry and bored, all at the same time, constantly for a month. I mean, living in hellish conditions and being unable to reach your family is already pretty tough. Add in the fact that there was a literal countdown in the center of town tracking how many days we had left before our horrible, painful deaths. And well, it wasn't much fun. The entire town's supply of booze and wheat disappeared at a record pace. Whatever threats keeping us sane were straining. And then, they introduced the Stardust machines. They set up a giant wood platform in the middle of town, across from the countdown, and that alone was pretty interesting enough to draw most of the town over. At the center was a large, sleek silver pot attached to some serious generators. According to the presenter, these pots were sent to towns and cities across the nation. Our bodies are made from the same stuff as stars, they said. And to the stars, our bodies will return. Apparently, they would allow you to relive the happiest part of your life, and then provide relief. Permanent relief. It was a SWAT machine. At first, we were outraged, disgusted. A mob broke out before the presentation continues, and they probably would have torn the platform to shreds if there weren't armed guards. But then, they cut our food rations. Twice. Summer was in full swing, and there wasn't enough water in the world to keep us cool. The highlight of that month was when I managed to catch and cook a squirrel over a fire. 2 weeks after the introduction, someone volunteered. Tom was his name, I think. I recognized him partially as the pub's constant customer, but mostly from how he nearly died sobering up when the booze ran out. He hadn't been the same since. About half the town watched. The other half was still disgusted and outraged and whatnot. But we were bored and curious. That was enough to stick around. The pot opened up, and he climbed in without any fuss. The window stayed open, and we could clearly see him sitting in the padded chair. The scientists powered it up. Tom's eyes popped wide for a moment, but then he smiled. He relaxed into the chair, looked up towards the sky, and smiled. Slowly, starting at his feet, light began to engulf him. It danced upwards, a gorgeous array of colors and shapes until he was completely immersed. I could faintly hear his laughter. When the lights faded, he was gone. Literally, the pot was entirely empty. Such was the process of turning into stardust, I guess. In the coming days, a few more people volunteered. Then more, and more. Every day, at least one person would come forward to turn into the stuff of stars. The entire town came to watch now, or what was left of it anyway. It was a spectacle, and not just because of the lights, though those were more incredible than anything I could hope to describe. It was the looks on people's faces as they died. It was intoxicating. It wasn't an orgasmic bliss or some drug-addled euphoria. It was a wholesome, innocent joy. It was the face of a mother holding her child for the first time. Of a child discovering a puppy beneath the Christmas tree. Of someone finally saying, "I do." Slowly, there was a shift in the town. The Stardust machine was more than an escape from a miserable life or painful, inevitable death. It was a game. You know how so many people like to guess what house they'd be sorted into in Harry Potter? It was like that. People wanted to guess what their joy would be, and they were ecstatic to finally experience it. There was a waiting list to die. I, on the other hand, was still petrified of the whole process. I'd seen mothers turn to stardust with their children on their laps, all laughing together, and it absolutely terrified me. What if I didn't have a happy enough memory? What if the machine went out when it was halfway through my body? But with only a day left, I knew what I needed to do. I went home, got the half bottle of vodka I'd been saving for Doomsday, and started drinking. My plan was to get drunk enough to let them kill me, to let me kill myself. Instead, I drank so much that I passed out in my basement. When I finally woke up and managed to get myself on my feet, I had a new fear. What if I didn't get to the Stardust machine before the meteor came? Well, sure enough, when I got to the center of the town, the pot was gone. So were the scientists, and so were the guards. The countdown read 0. I was going to die painfully and alone. That realization was more terrifying than hearing about the meteor, more terrifying than running out of food. I'd had the opportunity to go out peacefully, happily, beautifully, and I'd been a coward. A mix of panic and adrenaline set in, and I raced through my little town. Eventually, I found a truck. The keys were on the dashboard. With no guards to stop me, I burst through the blockade fence and swerved around the concrete barriers. There was a real city not too far that might still be stardusting, if I could just reach it. I didn't make it close. In fact, I only made it about 10 miles out of my town before stumbling on a gas station on the side of the highway. People were filling up their cars. The horrors of the past 3 months flashed in my mind and evaporated as I saw a man casually talking on his phone. I stared at him. I couldn't move. He seemed weirded out and left. I've been at this gas station for 5 hours. I bought an old phone and plugged it into the truck. There was no mention of the meteor anywhere. The Reddit posts are gone. Even my own submissions are gone, replaced with random shit I've never posted. The email to my mother was never sent. I found my own obituary. I don't know what to do. And I don't know what the fuck is going on. I hope I'm insane. I hope they're all still alive. My name is Benjamin, and I'm an astrophysicist. I may have just made a profound discovery, though I doubt that I'm the only one. Surely right now, hundreds of scientists are coming to the same conclusions. You can check for yourself if you don't believe me. Just wait until it gets dark, and then head outside. Of course, unless you're a trained astronomer with your star charts handy, the odds are that you might not notice anything strange at all. My role in this started only a few hours ago, although it feels like far longer. I was taking readings of the cosmic background radiation in my university's observatory when I noticed something odd on one of the monitors. A patch of sky was being analyzed by some software, likely initiated by one of my colleagues. I noticed a sudden drop in the signal. If I hadn't let my eyes wander over to the screen at the exact right moment, I might not have seen anything at all. The signal didn't drop out entirely. It just decreased sharply and suddenly in magnitude. Where before, the digital telescope's pixels were reading ones, they were now reading zeros. To put this in layman's terms as best as I can, the stars had gone dark, but only a few of them. I looked around the building in the break room, trying to find the person who belonged to the data, but I was completely alone. At this point, it was no more than a curiosity to me. Since my own data was compiling, and since my favorite online card game was blocked by the university's firewall, I decided to head up to the roof to do some basic observations. I'm an astrophysicist, not an astronomer, so I spent far more time gazing at computer screens than at the stars themselves. But I remembered a bit of my undergraduate credits and dusted off the rooftop optical telescope. I did my best to find the patch of sky that had experienced the sudden signal loss. I believed that I had found it, but it was unremarkable, and I couldn't tell if anything was amiss at all. I hate to say it, but I gave up then and there. Since I still had some time while my data compiled, I decided to be nostalgic and give the heavens a quick scan. I peered at my favorite constellations, or at least the ones that I remembered. First, I located Polaris. The star which, through an accident of axial precession, was in a near-perfect position to guide mankind north for hundreds of years. I checked out the Gemini twins, Castor and Pollux, brothers to Helen of Troy, and an inspiration to the two manned space flights in the early 1960s. Then, I looked to Orion, one of the first constellations that a freshman astronomer will pick out. I traced out the form of the hunter the way I had learned long ago. Orion's left shoulder was Betelgeuse, a strangely reddish star. His other shoulder was Bellatrix. Orion's right foot was... it was missing. I remembered that this was supposed to be the star Rigel, a distant high-energy supergiant. I couldn't find it anywhere. Stranger still, Orion's belt, that famous straight line of stars, didn't look quite right either. Confused, I kept looking at the stars, wishing that I had retained more of my undergrad astronomy. I looked for the brightest stars visible from my position on the globe. Everything seemed fine. Capella was there, Sirius, the dog star, was shining brightly. But then I noticed that Canis Major, the constellation containing Sirius, was incomplete. The dog had no tail. I couldn't for the life of me remember that star, so I ran downstairs, past the laboratory where my data was probably ready, to an unlocked classroom. I grabbed the textbook off the shelf and started skimming. After a few minutes, I found it. The missing star was Eludra, a distant star remarkable for its stability and use as a standard candle. My triumph was short-lived, however, because I had no idea what it all meant. No Rigel, no Eludra, and a general sense of wrongness in the sky. I needed more data. I grabbed some materials from the classroom. I intended to return them, but I'm now just realizing that I forgot. Oh well. I ran back up to the roof and started going over my observations with the proper reference materials. The two stars that I had noticed missing were Rigel and Elutra. However, other stars, such as Betelgeuse, Capella, and Polaris, were all present and accounted for. I looked at an index of stars and finally saw a pattern. The missing stars were further away than the others. Even though they both make up parts of Orion's body, Betelgeuse and Rigel are hundreds of light years distant. I spent the rest of the evening doing a systematic survey of the night sky. Unfortunately, there was an entire hemisphere between me and half of the visible stars, but I gave it my best shot. My initial theory was confirmed. The stars that were furthest away from Earth were missing. But I refined my observations. Using the optical telescope and my basic star charts, I came up with a long list of missing stars. I took these data points down to the lab and started building a computer model. I used a 3D map of the galaxy and plotted out the missing stars. That's when I noticed it. The data points all fell outside of a certain radius. There was a nearly perfect sphere of stars, with everything outside having simply vanished. An interstellar radius, hundreds of light years wide, was trapping all the visible stars and shutting out all others. Since that discovery, I haven't been able to stop myself from coming up with crazy explanatory theories. Were the stars all destroyed? No, they couldn't have gone nova. We would have seen it. That colossal release of energy probably would have destroyed the Earth. Had a chunk of the galaxy simply been trapped in a giant sphere? It fit the data, but it was crazy. What could do that? Who could do it? And why? Does the sphere imply intelligence? Or is it a natural form? Maybe we weren't in the Milky Way at all anymore. Perhaps our little sphere of stars was removed, teleported out of the galaxy. But that was just as impossible as anything else. I've taken some sleeping pills to quiet my mind, if nothing else. I'm sure that by the time I wake up, the entire scientific community will be abuzz with this information. But I'll leave you with a few things before I crash. The sphere, or whatever it is, outside of which all the stars have gone out. Don't be narcissistic and think that it's centered on Earth. I plotted the sphere, and while Earth is inside it, we are not at the center. The perfect center, as best as I can tell from my data, is an unremarkable G-class star located several hundred light years away from Earth, known to me only through a search of the stellar catalogs. I have no idea what this means. Finally, and possibly the most disturbing thought I've had all night is this. Because of the speed at which light travels, and because of the radius of the sphere, whatever happened to make those stars go dark? It happened over 700 years ago. On July 18th, 2020, NASA launched a new vessel. 6 astronauts boarded Goliath 1 and set off to prepare the first human colony on the moon. The preparations were expected to take a year, but the vessel carried 6 months of additional food past that expectation in case of emergency. Radio communication was only possible on the side of the moon facing the Earth. The astronauts were told to stay in this area to maintain radio contact. The astronauts had landed on the eastern border of the Serenitatis. This lunar mare was largely covered in basalt and held few craters, making it perfect for colonization. The goal of the astronauts was simple: map the area for colonization and blueprint the construction of buildings. The only real danger on the moon was meteors striking it, as the moon was devoid of any atmosphere. An electronic journal of the day's event was to be sent back to NASA, along with any interesting photos or videos. Although, it was to be seen if anything exciting could happen. It was the moon after all. The first few months of journals were fairly normal. The astronauts were right on schedule with the predicted progress. They wasted no time to blueprint the area. Everything in a normal town was to be in the future town. A grocery store, a school, a hospital, among other things. Of course, these supplies would need to be sent by other vessels. It wasn't their mission to build anything. Then, on the 17th of September that year, the daily report had not come. It was speculated that it was forgotten, but didn't come the next day either. Radio communication wasn't successful with the astronauts and was only met with static. The radio tower was seen as working perfectly. It seemed that the astronauts were simply not within range of it. Several missing videos were later recovered from the site. The following is a description of each video. The astronauts were told to label their videos by date, using numbers following the date if more than one video was recorded that day. The first video was labeled appropriately as September 16, 2020. It is around 10 minutes long and is mostly spent examining small craters near the border of the mare. Near the end of the video, the astronauts talk about hearing scratching sounds from the crater. But this wasn't audible. The journal sent to NASA for the 16th of September did not mention this noise. The second video is also labeled appropriately as September 17, 2020. This video was also focused around craters, specifically the nearby Bessel crater. This is an exceptionally large crater, over 9 miles across and a mile deep. The plan was to eventually build a bridge across the crater. This video is roughly the same length as the previous video. The astronauts begin to take notes of the crater when the scratching sound is heard again. This time, however, it is quite audible. It appears to be coming from the basin of the crater. The sound becomes so loud, it begins to irritate the astronauts. One of the men looks down over the edge to find the source of the sound. A force unseen by the camera suddenly pulls the astronaut into the crater. His screams are heard briefly, before the camera is cut short. The third and final video is labeled Code 7700. Please help. The date is unknown, but it can be assumed it is probably the next day. It begins with an astronaut in an oxygen tent. He explains in a calm voice that he has been unable to contact the radio. He also explains about how 2 of the astronauts have been horribly slaughtered. At this point, tears start to roll down his face, but he continues in a calm tone. The scratching noise from the previous videos is heard, suddenly and sharply. The camera is knocked to an adjacent wall of the tent, and we listened to the astronaut pleading, followed by a heavy thump. The man continues to plead and cry out for help, stating that he can't breathe. The camera is completely turned away from the man, so it is not seen what is attacking him. We see blood begin to splatter the adjacent wall. The man continues to scream for help and is now completely bawling. Blood splatters against the wall for a second time, alongside the sound of bones snapping and flesh being torn from them. His pleas for help suddenly stop and are just reduced to insane screaming and crying. As blood splatters against the wall again, a bit of brown liquid now mixes in with the bright red liquid. The tearing sound has now been replaced with that of squishing and sloshing. The only sound the man makes now is a quiet death rattle. Suddenly, the man goes silent, and several of his organs are tossed near the direction of the wall. Coincidentally, the night of September 18 was a red moon. None of the bodies of the astronauts from Goliath 1 were ever fully recovered. Colonization of the moon has been postponed until further notice. The team sent to investigate the radio communication problems the astronauts were having refused to talk to the public. Of the 4-man repair team, 2 have committed suicide since returning to Earth, while the 3 videos were recovered. A photograph was also recovered. It is still unknown as to what the photograph is.